Pandora Syndrome. Written by April Walleen. Read by April Walleen. Directed and recorded by Andreas Gallego. An hour later, Mel, Hank, and I walked into the crowded pack party. After a rather large blood infusion from one of her fellow pack members, Mel was walking without assistance, albeit still somewhat pale. Honestly, I was just happy the horrible bite wounds were gone. The donor blood had given her werewolf healing the kickstart she needed for the wounds to completely heal. Now there was only the barest of scars left. "Ready to mingle?" she asked us. Hank nodded excitedly, but I was unsure. I know she wanted me there, and I wanted to support her, but the other wolves did not want me there, and I could see it on their faces. The wolves kept their distance and shot Mel dirty looks whenever we passed them. Apparently word had gotten around that Mel's new friend was a bloodsucker. Some of the wolves even went so far as to snarl at me when I passed too close, though the reverberation of Mel's defensive growl quickly stopped them. It was a low, rumbling thing that came from somewhere deep in her throat, a sound that could never be mistaken for anything other than supernatural. It felt like the Civil War, a rebel hanging out with a Yank. Unheard of. Things went well enough until I caught Hank telling jokes, or so he called them. "What's a dog's favorite part of a tree?" I heard him say to one particularly bored-looking werewolf. "The bark!" he laughed riotously. Mel quickly rushed to Hank's side, leading him away from the werewolf, who now looked like he was about to eat Hank for breakfast. Always making friends, that Hank. It was kind of sad, though. He loved werewolves, thought they were fascinating creatures, but they did not seem to like him back. Except for Mel, that is. Between everyone's clear hatred for me and Hank's inability to keep his cool around werewolves, it was clear we were going to have to stick together. Mel seemed confident that we would make it out of here alive. I had my doubts. I had hoped to see some interesting werewolf rituals while at the party, but it was a surprisingly average get-together. People socialized, drank punch, and ate hors d'oeuvres. There was no howling, eating of small mammals, or bloody sacrifices as I'd imagined. I was about to follow Mel out back when I felt someone staring at me from across the room. I turned and saw Dirk standing with a petite blonde woman. Dirk was talking to her intently, but she stood staring straight at me, glowering with dark, beady eyes. A moment later she looked away, nodded a curt goodbye to Dirk, and then headed for the front door. I rolled my eyes. Guess she wasn't a fan of vampires either. Racist. I was about to turn away when I noticed a strange, eerily luminescent mark on the woman's upper arm. My eyes widened when I recognized it. It was the mark of the hunter. She seemed too small and thin for their ranks. But then again, Remy told me never to judge a hunter on appearance alone. I stared after her another moment and curiously drifted my awareness towards her. Nothing too obvious. Seconds later, I sensed the power in her blood. It rolled off of her in dizzying waves that made me a bit nauseous. I stared dumbfounded. How could such a small person harbor so much dormant power? As she headed for the door, I risked a deep inhalation of air. There was the standard ginger sting of the supernatural, but there was something else I couldn't identify. It wasn't like the earthy scent of werewolves or the copper penny smell of vampires. She was definitely human. A magic user of some sort. But what kind? In my decades as a vampire, I thought I'd categorize the scent of every basic supernatural species. Apparently I was wrong. I'd have to get closer to get a better sense, but she was already gone. Probably for the best. The woman was a hunter and not someone I'd want to annoy. Just then I heard Dirk bellow from the backyard, and Mel snatched my attention with a sharp look. Guess we were going to the backyard. I followed her and the rest of the guests out of the house. Like the front yard, the massive backyard was nicely manicured with neatly trimmed hedges and a variety of trees. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate the joining of our pack with the Redlands tribe," Dirk announced, motioning to a large, sullen-looking man to his right, with a noticeably fresh scar beneath his eye. "We defeated the Redlands pack in honorable combat and came out victorious. Now we invite their members to become ours, or suffer exile." Mel leaned into us then. It's Dirk's first big victory since he inherited the pack a few years ago, so he's making a big deal out of it. Why were they fighting? Hank asked. The Redlands pack had been causing trouble, making their wolf form seen to humans and having human gang affiliations. Dirk thoroughly dominated their leader. I tried to imagine a fight between the two big pack leaders. I'm sure what I imagined was nowhere close. There are only a few members of the Redlands pack here tonight, Dirk continued, directing our attention to a small group of large leather-clad men who sat uncomfortably in the far corner of the yard. They looked none too happy, though I couldn't imagine they would be excited about the crushing victory over their own pack. I now invite them to pledge their allegiance, he said, and pulled a large dagger from his belt, holding it up in both hands as the rival pack members reluctantly made their way through the crowd. As they strode onto the makeshift stage, Dirk brought the knife before the first member and slowly dragged it across his hand. I could smell the gingery wolf blood as it came to the surface of his palm. Do you swear to protect this pack with your life, holding each member as though they were your own blood? Dirk asked him. Reluctantly, the leader of the other clan nodded and presented his hand. In an instant, Dirk brought down the knife onto the man's palm, drawing blood. I took a step forward, ready to stop the ceremony and tell everyone to run, when Mel suddenly grabbed my arm. "Dee," she hissed at me quietly, pulling me back to her side. "What are you doing? Your eyes are black. Stop it, before someone sees." "The dead are coming," was all I could say. "I have to warn everyone." It sounded ominous, but there were undead coming this way, and I severely doubted they were interested in watching the ceremony. "Dead? Here?" Mel stared at me bewildered when I felt the intruders approach the house. "They're here, right now," I said urgently. "What are you talking about, you ditzy bloodsucker?" Mel asked, trying to keep me quiet. Just then, there was a pounding on the front door. A second later, it splintered. "Run!" I yelled at the top of my lungs, but everyone just turned to look at the crazy vampire who'd yelled at them. The confusion on their faces swiftly turned to horror as a dozen undead came trampling through the house. I stared in awe. They looked just like the undead you'd see in a horror movie, rotting bits of ragged flesh and clothing clinging to their bones unsettlingly. They appeared to have been dead for a while, but still had most of their flesh intact. Many sported large embalming stitches that zigzagged across their chests. They looked like they'd been freshly dug up from the graveyard. "Dora, what are you doing?" Hank yelled, narrowly avoiding an ambling corpse that lunged straight at him, missed, and then tumbled past. "They're not mine," I hissed at him indignantly. "I've never raised an army." "Well, stop them!" Mel screamed after bashing one of them in the head with her fist. The soft, rotting flesh and bone of the creature gave the blow little resistance. I stepped back and closed my eyes. Immediately, I could feel the creatures, their bones, and the texture of their sinews. I tried to wrap my mental hand around the invading zombies, but as soon as I did, it felt as though another, stronger hand simply swatted mine away, breaking my grip on the horde. I knew that power. This time it was stronger, vast in its ability. I'd never felt the undead in such numbers. Wielding the power to control them was an immense feat, one I certainly hadn't mastered. Then I got another sense, a smell and power I knew too well. Mine. I balked, wondering how the hell I could possibly be feeling this. Then it hit me. That's why the necromancer had wanted my blood. He wanted to use it to make himself stronger. I knew of humans who reveled in the strength of vampire blood, but being able to use my own control over the dead, I couldn't believe it. Mel waved a hand in front of my face. "It's the necromancer," I told her quickly. "No shit," Mel replied with a growling edge to her voice. "Are you going to help or just stare into space?" With that, she moved away to fend off the sudden onslaught. I worried then. I was feeling weak, but Mel was the one who had almost died. She couldn't possibly be up for a fight just yet. Screams echoed through the party as the undead lunged after guests. There was fierce growling, and a moment later, several large wolfman-like creatures were cutting through the zombies. The wolves' clothes had shred, their bodies were covered in fur, their ears elongated, and their teeth were sharp. I think they'd even grown taller, something I hadn't thought possible. It reminded me of the were-vamp I'd fought in the gulch, but times 100. I sighed in relief. It looked like the unwanted guests would be conquered soon enough. Unfortunately, my relief was short-lived as I felt a greater number of corpses head our way. There was 50 more, coming straight for the house. I could practically feel the ambling of their feet in my mind. "They'll swamp us!" I yelled. "It's fine," Hank told me. "Look, the wolves have it under control," he said as the wolfmen shredded one of the undead with their razor claws. The battle did seem one-sided. However, there were still plenty of undead to dispatch, and more on the way. "I'm not talking about them!" I shouted. Mel sniffed at the air, and I knew she had scented them. The undead had an unmistakable stench. It was practically overpowering in great numbers. "There's more coming!" Mel yelled to the other wolves. There were no more than 20 wolves at the house and nearly 50 undead invaders on their way, adding to the 15 or 20 that ambled around the backyard. I'm not good at math, but I'm pretty sure those weren't good odds. We were in serious danger of being swarmed. Mel looked at me then, and I could see it in her eyes. There were too many undead for her pack to handle. As she and her fellow wolves padded into defensive formations, I moved away from the fray and closed my eyes, attempting to tune out the chaos around me. I found the undead quickly, but there were too many of them for me to tap into, so I followed their essences, from zombie to zombie, like a chain to its source. The presence itself was immense, so much larger than I had encountered before. I fought back a shiver. The necromancer had been holding back with me, and now, using my own blood to bolster his power, I didn't want to think of what he was capable of. Brazenly, I reached out a mental tendril, trying to grab it, to strangle it. Then I was there, at the dark center of the necromancer's power. I tried to grasp it, but before I could, power smashed into me. I was thrown back, mentally and physically. My feet left the ground and I impacted with something solid. Then I felt water all around me. When I opened my eyes, I was floating in the pack leader's backyard fountain. Mel growled as she pulled me out of the water, her hands large, hairy, and sharp. I looked up into her face. I'd never seen her quite this wolfish before. I'd seen her hair and nails grow, but she was almost in the same large, hairy form her pack mates had adopted, though her face hadn't elongated like theirs. I worried that might be due to the trauma of the day. She was still looking pale. "You all right?" she asked me, the growl in her voice making her words thick and slow. "Just peachy," I replied, racking my brain for another option. I had to stop this, but how? Soaking wet and suddenly exhausted, I watched as Dirk literally barked orders at his pack. They fell into place quickly like a well-oiled machine, most forming a 2-wolf unit that attacked the larger concentrations of undead. Others collected the humans, herding them to safety at the far end of the yard. They looked like a supernatural battalion, and I was a soggy vampire running out of ideas. As they defended their home, I thought of the power I'd felt in the necromancer. Every time I'd fought him, I'd pulled out something different, something new I hadn't known I possessed before. It made me wonder, could I possess that level of power? I used to see my own necromancy as an oddity, another byproduct of being ushered into the supernatural world. But now I knew how to hold it, to work with it. It was a weapon, and I was going to use it. The necromancer had hunted me, stalked me, and even killed me. I felt like a pawn, a toy, and it made me mad. Now he was endangering my friends. I could not let that happen. A rage filled me then, and I remembered the fire that had coursed through my veins when I'd had Mel's blood. That had passed now, but it had made me aware of another part of myself: anger. It was a need to protect my friends and family, so fierce that my blood seemed to boil. I let it fill me, and I sunk down into the sense of death within myself. My own darkness was a deep, inky thing, flowing and churning like a river. My blood cooled, replacing with this new dark feeling, something that seemed to almost call me, and it felt like home. If I had any real presence of mind, these feelings would have scared me. They probably should have, but they felt strangely right. It was like learning to drive, awkward at first, but as I went with the river, I found I could navigate. I was awkward and clumsy, seeming to drift this way and that with my senses. I wasn't even quite sure where I was going, until I felt them. 50 feet beneath me, I saw each one in my mind's eye. They twitched at my mental touch, and I opened my eyes, feeling the power within me churning, coiling like a snake that was ready to spring into action. Mel and Hank stared at me with wide eyes. I didn't know what I looked like just then, but I imagined it was something like Carrie after she'd had a bucket of pig's blood dumped on her head. That's certainly what it felt like. "If this works," I warned Mel, "tell Dirk I'm sorry about his yard." "What?" she asked, looking like the most confused werewolf I'd ever seen. I would have laughed if I didn't have work to do. With the merest twitch of my power, the dead began to shift and turn. The ground rumbled with the movement of the earth around them. It was working. They were digging their way up faster than I would have thought possible. They clawed past clay and rock like they were climbing a ladder. The Packmaster's pristine foliage was about to become a bit of a mess. "What are you doing?" Mel asked, wide-eyed, as the cement cracked beneath us. "Helping," I replied in annoyance. Just then, the oncoming batch of enemy undead came bursting in through the house, ambling after guests, grasping and clawing at anyone in arm's reach. "Keep the Z's off me!" I yelled at her. End tables crashed and doors splintered as a wave of 20 or so zombies crashed through the house and into the backyard. The wolves were ready for them, but as there were at least 5 undead for every wolf, I couldn't imagine they would be able to keep up long. Mel roared then. Yes, roared. And began to shift again, the magic in her blood smoothing the transition. Her face grew longer, and she turned into the full, frightening form of her fellow pack members. I tried not to worry about the energy that must take when she was still recovering. I stared in awe. My friend was no longer herself, but a wolfen she-bitch. Mel grew several inches in height, her legs and torso elongated, hair coated her entire body. Her eyes had gone wild, and her canines and claws were as sharp as daggers. Mel took a running lope, claws digging up clumps of sod as she went. With force, she smashed into a marauding group of undead, bludgeoning everything within reach. She slashed and spun, her teeth finding purchase on undead flesh. Ignoring the chaos around me, I concentrated on my creatures. They came fast, tunneling below us, stirring the soil, and they were aching to be free. So close. Just a few more minutes, and we would have all the backup we needed. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a zombie lunge at Mel, latching onto her shoulders and biting down. I looked up in panic. To my shock, the zombie's teeth smashed into bits on her apparently impenetrable pelt. Mel reeled, grabbing it by the shoulders and threw it across the lawn. Ha, stupid zombies. I caught sight of Hank then, and panic flooded me. Why hadn't he retreated with the rest of the humans? He was dancing around in the distance between Mel and I, wielding a pool skimmer. He swung at anything that got around Mel, and my heart warmed a little. He was trying to protect me, the sweet idiot. Just then, the top half of a zombie, its arms and teeth still clawing and biting for anything it could reach, flew past Mel's defense, lunging towards me. Hank swatted the rotted, gnawing thing away like a fly. A pool skimmer as a weapon. Who knew? Despite the fact that the undead just kept coming, barreling into the yard in a seemingly endless stream, I was secure in the knowledge that my friends would handle themselves. At least long enough for my reinforcements to arrive. I focused on the task at hand, hoping that the necromancer would run out of bodies to reanimate. Now that I knew he could use the trick of turning my own undead against me, I was sure to wrap them in my own power, making what I hoped would be an impenetrable shield against the bastard. Someone shouted my name, and I looked up to see my brother standing in the doorway, holding one of the ambling creatures up by the neck. He quickly bashed its head into the wall, making an unsettling crunch, and dropped it before it could stain his shirt. I stood a little in awe. I knew Jack was strong, but it was still a bit impressive to see him in action. "What the hell are you doing here?" I yelled at him. "You were in trouble," he replied simply. "You expect me to just sit in the car?" A moment later, Sarge came bounding out, heading straight for one of the undead, attempting to claw at Mel's back. He firmly lashed its teeth around the zombie's ankle and began to pull, dragging the thing away with little effort. I stood there, mouth agape, when the cement fixtures all around us began to crack and shift. Sagging a little, I sighed in relief. Reinforcements had finally come. Vortexes of earth began to swirl into sinkholes of dirt and pavement. The wolves looked around in shock. I could tell what they were thinking. First zombies and now an earthquake? What next? I'd be shocked too. Actually, I was when a bunch of undead men came clambering up from the earth draped in traditional caballero gear, looking like they came straight out of Santa Anna's legions. They strode out of the dirt beside their American counterparts still wearing boots, spurs, riding gear, and wide-brimmed hats. Dozens came up at a time, filling the huge backyard. Most were little more than bones, while others sported the occasional patch of rotted flesh clinging stubbornly to their corpses. My army was much older than the necromancers, which had clearly been dredged up from fresher graves. I would not let that deter me. Though mine had less muscle mass to speak of, they more than doubled the invading numbers. I was pretty sure they were stronger, too. I could feel it in the power I shrouded them in. I knew this wasn't the time to be vain, but a little knot of pride swelled in me. My undead moved of their own accord, just like Jack, except they were basically walking piles of bone. As they rose up, I directed them towards the invaders with a mental order. They moved in a solid regimen that made the Wolves organization look like children at play. These were former soldiers, and they acted accordingly, overtaking the necromancer's hordes in smoothly executed waves. One of my creatures, a cowboy with a particularly wide-brimmed hat, nodded to me as he directed the others. He had clearly been their leader in life. I felt his deference and the loyalty of my creations cascading through me. It felt strangely good to have that kind of power, even a little frightening, but my friends needed me, and I had to protect Mel's family. "Dora, what the hell is going on?" Hank stammered as my brother and Sarge fought their way towards me. I would have tried to explain, but I had a small army of skeletons to control. Admittedly, I hadn't expected to be leading a horde of undead that looked like extras on the set of an Alamo movie. But hey, army of skeletons. Well-trained ones, too. Couldn't ask for much more than that. Mentally, I commanded my legion to destroy the encroaching undead, sending little battalions of my army to destroy every horde of undead I could find. They flowed around the wolves, tearing the shambling intruders apart limb from limb. I felt a strange joy in directing these dead men. They had died fighting, and they had come back raring to go. In life, they'd trained as warriors and soldiers. Now, with my own power at their backs, I had access to their skills and traits. I did my best to respect that. The long-dead Mexican warriors hatcheted apart the zombies with their dirt-caked hatchets, while the American cowboys used their rusty swords and sodden pistols. A few tried to shoot their guns, but their powder was too moist and the barrels too packed with dirt. They were surprised, but quickly adjusted, using their heavy metal rifles and six-shooters to bash apart their enemies instead. My men were swiftly tearing through the hordes before them. 2 cowboys dragged a zombie in a black mortician suit down to the ground, smashing its face with their long, hardened knuckles until it was a headless pile of gore on the lawn. Another of my summon warriors made a claw of its bony fingers and tore straight through the stomach of a zombie a few feet away, spattering me with its innards. Appreciated, but ew. When enough of my zombies had risen to cover every invader in the backyard, I directed a few to search out the undead that were still to come. They rushed through the house, taking down each one as they came. I felt them move further and further up the trail until they were halfway up the street. They rushed on like shadows in the night. Through them, I could sense their surroundings, the smell of the trees, the feel of the pavement beneath their feet. I could almost see where they were going through their long, deceased eyes, or eye sockets, whatever. When I felt the loose soil crumbling beneath their feet, I knew they'd reached their source, the graveyard the necromancer was using to fuel its ranks. Then I felt it, the necromancer's presence. Like me, he was focused on his minions. If I could just reach him, my dead men could grab him and bring him to me. Silently, my undead moved closer and closer. Unfortunately, right as my man was about to grab him, the necromancer sidestepped, pulling the night around him like a shroud, causing me to lose all sense of him. I cursed. I almost had him. When would this end? How long before the necromancer struck at me again? I pulled back my undead and realized that the sense of the necromancer wasn't just gone. The power fueling its undead was gone. I opened my eyes and found the backyard filled with wolves, my dead men, and a slew of rotted undead parts strewn about. Mel, Hank, Jack, and Sarge all moved to my side. Everyone else stood in shock, not knowing what to do or say. Then one of my undead approached. It was the American cowboy with the particularly wide-brimmed hat. Upon closer inspection, he was an old, yellowed skeleton with leather gun holsters clinging to his hip bones. "The enemy's been taken care of, ma'am," he told me the cowboy's drawl. "Anything else we can do for you?" It was strange to hear him so clearly since his lungs and associated organs had been eaten away by worms more than a century ago. Good to know that little mental trick with the dead worked even if the dead in question barely had skin. Just then I noticed 2 of my skeletons brawling. "Hey!" I yelled. Immediately they stopped. The 2 turned to me and started chattering, one in English and one in Spanish. Though my little power translated the Spanish for me, however, their talking at the same time made it hard to decipher. I gleaned that they had been fighting against each other in the war for California. They'd all died on this spot and been buried together in a mass grave. Well, I couldn't blame them for being upset about that, but there were 24 wolves staring at me expectantly. I didn't have time for this. "Thank you for your assistance. I told him as cordially as I could muster. You may go. Rest now. Uniformly, the skeletons saluted, or bowed, and then went digging back into the ground, pushing each other aside as they went, leaving the bodies of the defeated zombies behind. I staggered for a second, and my brother took my arm. My knees were weak, close to crumbling beneath me. But Jack kept me upright. Awkwardly, I looked at Dirk. He glared down at me fiercely in his half-wolf form. He was much larger than the rest, and I had to crane my neck up to look at him. Sorry for the interruption. You were saying something about the packs? I knew I wouldn't get away without a scolding, but I thought having his cronies rush me and peg me to the ground was unnecessary. Before Jack or I could even react, big hairy arms slammed me to the cement, and I found myself looking up at several very angry-looking werewolves. I would have been able to handle one large wolf, maybe two, but definitely not half a dozen. Especially not with my arms and legs pinned to the ground. Though the way I was feeling, after my exertion with the undead, I wasn't sure I could fight anyone off, even if my limbs were free. Hank and my brother tried to fight the wolves off. Hank's pool skimmer did nothing as he hit the back of one of them with it. Jack got one wolf in a headlock and twisted his body, flinging the creature across the yard. Where the hell did he learn to do that? WWE? Jack, stop! I yelled. He froze mid-stride, on his way to rip another wolf off me. Jack looked down at me with wide eyes, like I was crazy for not letting him help. Mel stood off to the side, her body splattered with blood, a helpless look on her face. I could tell she wanted to help, but she couldn't attack her own pack members. I was fairly certain there wasn't a thing she could do. Pack loyalty was a formidable connection. I had my bond with Remy, so I had an idea of what she was likely going through. Dirk stood over me. Explain, he demanded. It was the necromancer I told you about, I replied with as much dignity as I could muster while being held down. I believe he tracked us here. Tracked you here, you mean, he fumed. I could see Jack struggling not to bum-rush Dirk, while Mel had moved to Hank's side, making sure that he stayed quiet. The creatures behind Dirk snarled and yipped in my direction. Look, I'm just as surprised as you are. I did the best I could to help. By tearing up my home? Dirk nearly howled. As it was, the growling edge of his tone only seemed to be growing thicker with his anger. Sir, I said to Dirk as cordially as I could, I appreciate your letting me come to your party and congratulations on defeating the Redlands pack, but I swear I did everything I could to protect you and your family against this unfortunate event, I wheezed. I don't want to be rude since I am a guest in your home, but if you don't let us go, I will be forced to bring my skeleton friends back, and they like me more than they like you. I wasn't entirely sure I would be able to pull something like that off. As it was, I felt like I could barely move. The fact that I was still conscious was pretty impressive, or so I thought. Dirk's fierce golden eyes shifted nervously back to the holes in the ground left by my army. A low growl rumbled within him, and he straightened. He nodded to the wolves holding me down, and I felt their pressure lift. Dirk scowled at me. Go, now, Dirk finally growled as Hank and Jack helped me to my feet. I felt like I could hardly stand. I never want to see your face here again. I looked to Mel, whose brows looked permanently arched in dismay. I nodded at Dirk. Guess I wouldn't be invited over for tea anytime soon. By the way, you might want to talk to your realtor about your house being built on top of a burial ground, I told him and tried to walk away. Unfortunately, my knee buckled when I tried to put weight on it. If not for Hank and Jack, I'd have been sprawled on the floor. Just then, there was a blur of movement in front of me. Before I knew it, I was encircled in a set of strong arms. I looked up to find a pair of steely blue eyes gazing down at me with a mixture of anger and worry. Missed the fun, did I? Came Remy's cool voice, though there was no edge of humor to it. Though I was happy to see him, I inwardly groaned. Remy wasn't due back until tomorrow. He'd felt my distress from another city away. I paled. He had rushed all the way back here just to help me? I took a minute for my mind to catch up with my mouth. I have this under control, I told him as confidently as I could. I can see that, Remy replied. Then he looked up, glaring daggers at the assembly of wolves. His presence was enough to intimidate most creatures when he was calm, but this was quite impressive. No one moved a muscle. I guess being an older-than-dirt, uber-powerful immortal had its perks. He looked to Dirk then. I will be taking my progeny home now, old friend. Are we good here? Dirk just glared and then nodded. Old friend. I knew that they were aware of each other, but old friend? I'd have to ask Remy about that later. As it was, I was happy that he was here. Nonetheless, I was supremely embarrassed about being caught in the current situation. Just then, I felt the world shift beneath me. "Pandora?" Remy called as he looked down at me in concern. I was tired, exhausted from my exertions with the dead. I'd overreached myself and wasn't used to harnessing such power. Now that it was gone, I felt like a shell. My arms and legs went limp and I hung loosely as Remy cradled me against him. I knew then that I was going to lose consciousness. I wanted to tell him that I was all right, that I just needed to sleep, but I couldn't make my mouth move. The world around me went fuzzy, and eventually everything faded completely to black. When I finally awoke, I had no idea what time or what day it was. I just knew that I was in a soft bed with strong arms wrapped around me. I sighed in relief. We were warm, and if I could, I would have stayed there forever. I tested my arms and legs, happy to find they now responded with strength and dexterity. Relieved, I snuggled back into Remy. I was happy he was finally home, even though I knew we had things to talk about. "Did you have a nice time at the party?" Remy crooned into my ear as he nuzzled into my hair. A shiver of longing traveled down my spine. However, I could not ignore his words. He wanted to know what had happened, and he wanted to know now. I couldn't really blame him. I twisted so I could look up into his eyes, which glowed with a faintly silver light in the dim room. He played lightly with my hair, waiting patiently for me to gather my thoughts. "I know I made a mess of things," I began. "But it wasn't my fault," I continued in hopes of defending my actions. "The necromancer is back." Remy stiffened at that, but didn't say anything, wanting me to continue. I could almost feel the edge of his mental fingers impatiently wanting to pull the story from my mind, but he pulled himself back. My heart warmed. The amount of effort he was using to keep calm was staggering. With a steadying breath, I went back and relayed everything I could from the moment I'd gotten the Coven's note to the second he arrived at the pack leader's house. When I was done, he just lay there holding me in his arms. I hadn't thought he could be more tense, but I could feel it in him. He was like a tightly coiled spring. It was hard for him not to just rush out and start a manhunt for the necromancer that second. "I'm proud of you," he said then to my utter amazement. All I could do was sit there with my jaw hanging open. "I am impressed that you could pull up that many dead on such short notice, and from such a distance." All I could do was smile. "Thank you," I replied, dropping a small kiss on his lips. "I just don't understand. Why now? The necromancer was gone for years." "I have a confession," he said after a short pause. "I've expected something like this to happen for some time. Not on as grand a scale, but something. There had been reports of disturbances in the local cemeteries, but it was nothing conclusive. I should have stayed in town, kept a closer eye on you." "I don't need a closer eye from you or anyone else," I replied. "You certainly made that apparent this evening," he smirked. "However, after this evening's event, keeping your powers hidden from the supernatural community is no longer an option." My heart sank at that. "Once others hear of your strength, you may be challenged." "Challenged? Why?" Remy sighed. "For dominance, territory, a test of wills. You've dealt with a few of these before, but now they may seek you out." I shook my head. This was so not what I needed. "Well, what do we do?" "I will let it be known that a challenge against you is a challenge against me. That may deter a few, but the powerful ones, those unafraid of the consequences, will seek you out, and I cannot be at your side at all times." "I don't need you to be, Remy. Thank you for the warning, though," I sighed, thinking of what to do. "I will just have to keep on guard for a while." Remy smiled sadly. Just then, a hesitant look crossed his face, and I groaned a little. "There's something else, isn't there?" "There is also the matter of the hunters." My eyes widened a little. I hadn't even thought about them. "The Order cleaned up the bodies left by the necromancer. Luckily yours went neatly back into their graves." "Well, it would have been rude to just let them drop there," I joked, but Remy stayed serious. It was definitely not the time for levity. "The Order and their hunters will be looking into this event, and it is very likely that you'll have to appear before them to make your statement. You will have to tell them about the necromancer." I groaned. The idea of telling the Order all about my stalker was not one that I relished, especially since it seemed that my presence was the catalyst for each of these events. They hadn't been helpful with the vampire coven. Mel had been super pissed about that one. My breath hitched then. Mel. I'd made a huge mess of her packmaster's home, and she was the one who had brought me there. Is Mel in trouble? I blurted to Remy in panic. He rolled back and stared at the ceiling, giving it real thought. I'm not sure, he replied to my dismay. They are proud creatures. You don't think they'll hurt her, do you? Their punishments are usually of a physical nature, so I would think so. My blood boiled at the thought. But they couldn't. I mean, you don't think they would kill her? I do not believe any member of their pack was killed in the altercation, so I doubt it. They are a very eye-for-an-eye society. However, there was much damage and many brutal injuries. The punishment will be harsh. I was on my feet in an instant. I have to help her! Pandora, you cannot interfere with a pack and their laws. She is one of them. I doubt they would be so quick to kill their brethren for bringing a troublesome outsider into their midst. She can handle herself. There is nothing we can do for her. I wanted to argue. I wanted to march back to Dirk's house and demand that they return my friend intact. But I knew he was right. I may be able to call up an army of the dead, but starting a war with a pack of werewolves was not my best option here. Reluctantly, I sat by Remy's side. That was when he decided to drop the bomb on me. You need to stay here with me for a while, he said abruptly. I should have seen this coming. What? No. It's all right, Remy. I'll be fine on my own, I replied. I cared for Remy deeply, but I could lose myself in him too easily. I mean, he had a nice house, but I wasn't really free to do anything I wanted here. He would always be around to question and accidentally listen in on my thoughts. Pandora. Look, I know you're worried, but I can take care of myself. This is a serious matter, he replied sternly. I insist that you stay. You'll have to make me then, I told him. He didn't like making me do things against my will, and I hoped that would deter him. I will not do that, he replied. I have told you before. Then I'm going back home, I told him, trying to make him understand. I have work. I have a life. He leaned in closer, taking my shoulders in his hands. You can have those things while staying with me. I want you near, he said, and seemed to hesitate a moment. I need you here. My heart ached a little at that. He looked so sad, so serious, so worried. Necromancers are walking beacons of death and power, he said then. They are a rarefied profession. I've only met a few, and they are very territorial, almost more so than werewolves. You have natural talent with it. I do not know where it comes from, but this necromancer likely has training, experience, and skill. I rolled my eyes a little. Yeah, I kind of figured out that one for myself. He sighed and then softened a little. You know that I adore you. I must and will protect you. Please, let me. I nearly caved, but managed to stay strong. I know he was just trying to keep me safe, but it was unnecessary. I wasn't some glass object to be wrapped up and stored away from potential harm. I don't need protecting. I took care of the enemy. Dead again in no time flat. Be that as it may, you will not always have the good fortune to be on a burial ground. What if they caught you in the city where they ship their dead to the outskirts of town? You think there are enough bodies near to reanimate for your protection? Let us not forget, you've merely dealt with the puppets. Their master is at large. My heart lurched. I could feel his worry. God, why did he have to be so psychotically sweet? Fine, I groaned in annoyance. I'll stay for a few days. Months. What? No, a month. Deal, he said before I had any idea what just happened. Had I really just agreed to stay at his place for a month? Crap. How had he switched gears so quickly? One minute he was cute and worried, the next he was tricking me into becoming his little house vamp. I sat shocked. 2,000 years of political shenanigans certainly came in handy. Don't know why I was surprised. After all, the Romans practically invented debate. Well, I have to go home and get my things, I guess. Go tomorrow. You are still recovering. Stay tonight. Okay, look, I have work tomorrow night. I could feel him grow tense. Staying with you does not equal a get-out-of-work-free card. Yes, that is fine. Good. Well, thanks, I replied awkwardly. Now, let us relax, shall we? Remy smiled. There was a flirtatious glint in his eye, and I had a feeling that relaxing was the last thing he had on his mind. A shiver of longing ran down my spine. I hadn't been prepared to stay at his place. While over the decades I had stored a lot of things here, but he had been gone for a while, and my everyday stuff was back at my place. I hesitated, but I knew he was right. My body was sore and my mind was reeling from the whole evening. Raising so many undead had seriously drained me. "All right," I finally replied, and a second later I was wrapped tightly in Remy's arms. He always felt so right. His lips rested at my temple, and my eyes fluttered in contentment. It was like I was merely an extension of him, and him of me. He whispered into my ear, "My own." I shook my head at his old-fashioned term of endearment, sighed deeply, and drifted off into sleep with a smile on my lips.